Hi everyone, it's Alex Wilson here, accredited mental health social worker and owner of Mindful Recovery Services. I'm going to do a little vlog today about stress response versus stress reaction. Okay, so this concept was really well illustrated in a book by Jon Kabat-Zinn called Full Catastrophe Living. Those of you who are clients of mine know that I did a little book review on this recently. It's not a new book, but it's a great book if you want information about mindfulness and anxiety and how mindfulness-based stress reduction works. That is the book to read. But there is a little diagram in that book that I have copied. I've changed it a little bit, but this is mainly how it is in the book. And this diagram shows us the differences between responding to stress and reacting to stress. Okay, so you can see in this picture, here we've got the person in the middle, okay, and we've got external stress events, okay, so life is going to happen. It's going to be stressful sometimes. That's all there is to it, okay? We have to accept that. So external stress is happening. Now, over here in this stress reaction, you can see what's happening, okay? So a stress reaction involves, a perception of risk. So we start to feel like, oh my God, something really bad and scary and dangerous is happening, okay? We can go into that fight or flight mode. I've talked about that in previous vlogs. If you don't know what that is, it's basically the brain's reaction to a perceived threat and very, very high anxiety, stress, things like that. Stress hormones, so adrenaline, things like that, start pumping through our system, and our sympathetic nervous system is activated. So that is the part of the nervous system that gets us ready to take action, right? To fight, run away, sometimes freeze. So heart rate goes up, our blood pressure goes up, and we change our breathing rate. So we tend to breathe in much more rapidly. It's our body's way of getting more oxygen to the big muscle groups so that we're stronger and faster. Okay, so this is great if a lion is running at us, but this is often what's happening when we're just living in our everyday lives, right? And so when people come to see me for anxiety, for example, which is probably the most common presentation, this is going on for them all the time, day to day, okay? And there's no lions. So when this is happening all the time, okay, and that doesn't mean 24/7, but when it's happening a lot, it turns into this chronic stress reaction. And the chronic stress reaction, some of the symptoms of that, sleep problems, okay? So sleep disturbance, trouble falling asleep, trouble staying asleep, early morning waking, oversleeping for some people, right? Appetite changes. So reduced appetite is very common, but also sometimes an increase in emotional eating or really varied appetite. Anxiety. So people start to become aware that they are struggling with anxiety. They might be worrying a lot. That's one of the signs. And sometimes chronic pain, so headaches, backaches, muscle aches, and things like that can all be part of this chronic stress reaction. So when that goes on for a while, what do we tend to do? If we don't realize what's happening and if we're not having a stress response, our natural reaction is to go into maladaptive coping. So maladaptive coping, big words, include self-destructive behaviors. So self-harm, drug and alcohol abuse is in there, over or under eating, overworking. It can look a little different for different people, but maladaptive coping is basically what we do when we're trying to come up with a solution to our stress problem, and it might be working in the short term, but it's making it worse in the long term. Maladaptive coping can lead to breakdown, right? And so breakdown involves physical, psychological exhaustion. There's a little pop-up message. Ignore that. Loss of motivation and enthusiasm, depression, physical illness. Okay, so this is where people really reach their breaking point and the body's just sort of calling time out, enough. Now, breakdown, maladaptive coping, chronic stress reaction, all of these, we notice these arrows. These all feed back into our system. They actually add more stress. If I'm not sleeping very well, what happens to my body? I feel more stressed. If I'm not eating well, if I've got chronic pain, if I'm, drinking too much, or if I'm smoking a lot of pot, or, whatever it is, if I'm really depressed, all of this is feeding into internal stress. So it's actually adding to our stress. And then that influences our nervous system, our immune system, all of the systems, and around we go, right? So you can see how this loop gets going for people, right? That's the stress reaction. We don't want to do that, okay? That's getting progressively worse and worse and worse. Our body's feeling worse, our mind, our emotions are feeling worse. So what's the alternative? Okay, if we're going to try and break out of this stress reaction, we want to take on what we call a stress response. Okay, so our body still might do the same thing. Okay, so we might have all these symptoms of perceived risk, fight or flight, adrenaline. Okay, but instead of going into a chronic stress reaction, instead we're going to bring some mindfulness to what's happening. Okay, we're going to learn to observe our thoughts, our feelings, and the perceived threats, right? So we're able to kind of challenge and reframe some of what seems very scary, and we might be able to kind of, use our good advanced mind to say, okay, maybe this isn't as bad as I think it is. Maybe there's a different way to approach this. Maybe this is not so scary. Maybe I can actually deal with this differently. We can use relaxation techniques. Parasympathetic nervous system. So this is what we're trying to do. We're trying to trigger our parasympathetic nervous system, which is the opposite of the sympathetic. The parasympathetic is the deactivation. So that's what we're trying to trigger in a stress response as opposed to a stress reaction. The way we can trigger the parasympathetic nervous system, there's a few different ways. If you've seen any of my videos or read my ebook about surviving an emotional crisis, there's 4 very powerful physical skills that we can use to trigger our parasympathetic nervous system. We can also do activities like exercise, relaxation, pleasurable activities can trigger that, okay? So there's a bunch of different ways we can do that. What that then leads into is an increased awareness of our body, muscle tension and breathing. So we can pay attention to, okay, I'm holding tension here, I'm over breathing, and how might I encourage my body to settle, right? Awareness of context and checking the facts. So my body's telling me that there's something big and dangerous going on. Is that actually true? And if not, how could I reframe that and challenge those perceptions a little bit? We can use problem solving. So if you can solve the problem that's triggering you, then solve it. But don't do that in one of these maladaptive ways, right? Like skillful problem solving. Emotion focused strategies. So this might be stuff that people work on with their therapists around, regulating emotions, naming emotions, things like that. Seeing new options, so coming up with, alternatives. When we get in stress reaction, we get very, very kind of blinders on of this is the only way to react to this and I'm powerless. But actually, there's probably some other things we can do. And we experience a quicker recovery to mental stability and a calmness and balance of mind. So we're still going to experience distress, okay? We're still going to experience the stress response, but it's not feeding back into the system. We're not making ourselves more stressed with our coping mechanisms, okay? So stress response takes some practice. It's often really good to find somebody, whether it be a therapist, whether it be a really good book, whether it be some guided relaxation or mindfulness programs. A great exercise program can help with this. So looking at ways that we can really slow down and be mindful of this stress reaction and start to get a little more time and patience around responding to this stressful stimuli. Okay, so for more information about this, grab a copy of Jon Kabat-Zinn's book, Full Catastrophe Living. If you're a client of mine, you would have seen that in my latest client newsletter, but you Google it, you can get it everywhere. It's really great, and if this interests you, it goes into a lot more detail about it. All right, thanks for listening as always, guys. I'll talk to you soon. Bye.